Hello, everyone, and welcome to Art Salon. I'm Ellie Shore, and I've been organizing and leading these art salons for 3.5 years now. It's been incredibly exciting. I have a different artist, or sometimes two artists, speak at each of the salons, and we try to cover every possible kind of art and people who are doing exciting things and working with materials and working with ideas and just all kinds of different ways. It's a dialogue that is continuing and hopefully is a community of artists that is continually growing. We have two artists here tonight who haven't worked together before. They work in very different kinds of materials and different kinds of mediums, but they have some commonalities. They were brought together actually by Carla Walter, who curates the art gallery at Eissey Campus, Palm Beach State College up in Palm Beach Gardens. And I invited them to come and speak here. Leora Stewart is a fiber artist who has had an extensive teaching and art career in textiles and in fiber arts. She got her bachelor's degree and her master's in fine arts at the Institute of Art in Chicago. And she has taught in Philadelphia, in Hartford, Connecticut, and in New York City in, I counted them, 6 different colleges. I think of her as having taught at FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology, because in a previous lifetime I graduated from there myself. But she also taught at NYU and at CCNY Baruch and at the New School for Social Research and Parsons, I think. And now she teaches here fiber arts at the Armory Art Center. Along with her teaching career, she has exhibited. She's been in publications in many, many different places. Vicki Siegel is a painter and also a photographer who got her bachelor's degree at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana and got credits towards a master's degree at Tyler School of Arts in Rome. She lived in Rome and in Milan for 10 years and worked in producing large-scale video and slide projection kinds of campaigns for advertising clients, and came back here and worked as an art director for many years, and then discovered painting and has been exploring the medium of paint, of acrylic paint, and also of photography merged with paint and many other materials. If you haven't seen the show that they've got together up at Eissey Campus, please go up and see it. They're such different artists, and yet there are things that they very much share. A love of color just permeates the exhibit. A lot of natural imagery, a lot of drawing on things happening in nature. With Vicki, there's also another human figurative component to it. There's a lot of abstraction that happens in both of their works. Very fascinating work. We're going to hear from Leora Stewart first, and then from Vicki Siegel. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Ellie. Ellie had asked me who were artists who influenced me when we were talking about my work, and I said that I'd like to, many, many artists have influenced my work, but I'd like to keep it very brief in that 2 of the major influences were when I was a student at the Art Institute of Chicago. I was studying weaving as well as other mediums, and I was fortunate enough to see an exhibition called Woven Forms that was held at the Craft Museum in New York City in the early 60s. And that dates me, but anyway, the work was of Lenore Tawney, which you see the slide of, and the work of Claire Zeisler. And this made me realize that I could use fiber as my medium to create my own work. And then I was fortunate enough, when I did my graduate work at the Art Institute of Chicago, to be an assistant in Claire Zeisler's studio. This is an example of the type of work she was beginning to develop, which were freestanding forms using fiber and off-loom techniques. At the time, it was quite revolutionary. She used knotting and loop stitching and wrapping. And I worked in her studio for the 2 years that I was a graduate student, and she became my mentor. After I graduated and got my MFA, I traveled and I began my teaching career. And the first school I actually had a full-time teaching job was in Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. And I was asked to teach there and also to set up a graduate program. And one of the first students I had in the graduate program is here in the audience tonight. His name is Louis Knaus. And stand up, Louis. And he's my pride and joy because he's a very successful, wonderful fiber artist who has recently been named an American Fellow and will be giving a talk tomorrow here in the library to the Basket and Fiber Guild. So you're all more than welcome to come. Should be wonderful. At any rate, aside from teaching, I eventually moved to New York City in 1974, where I taught in many different places, as Ellie mentioned, all part-time, by the way. And I set up my own studio. And I worked on architectural commissions, as well as my own smaller pieces. And this is from my website page. And I chose it because I wanted you to see the piece on your right, La Mémoire, which was one of the architectural commissions that I did, which was commissioned by the Wool Bureau of America and was actually constructed in the windows of the American Craft Museum across the street from the Museum of Modern Art. So we are literally working in the windows of the museum building this piece. Having been an assistant in Claire Zeisser's studio, I also began using assistants on my large-scale projects. And most of the time my assistants were students, people who had studied with me and then came to the studio to work with me on my pieces, which is one of the main subjects I'd like to discuss tonight, is about working in studios with assistants and collaborative work. But anyway, this is the main piece of that. When it was commissioned, the only restriction was that it used the wool from the American Wool Bureau and 28 colors. And if you were to go on my website and click on the writing, those are the different categories of work that I've done. And then in 2006, I relocated here to Florida, where I met a wonderful community of very supportive artists. And I began to teach the fiber arts class here at the Armory. And I was also invited by Cynthia Palmieri, then director at the Ann Norton Sculpture Gardens, to do a piece in the environment of the Ann Norton. And if any of you, I'm assuming all of you know the Ann Norton Sculpture Gardens, which are one of the wonderful treasures here. And this was a great opportunity because I began to be very influenced by my surroundings. Having lived in New York City for over 30 years, here I was in an environment very close to nature. And the nature of Florida, really, especially the banyan ficus tree, the way it grows and wraps, I was very taken with. So this piece was my idea of doing a hammock, not a hammock that you can lie in, but a hammock that is suspended between the trees, but representing the growth and the intertwining of the banyan tree. And it's done in natural hemp and jute fiber. And I kept thinking about the banyan tree and the idea that I'd had for a while of somehow working with this imagery. And I was very fortunate to meet a wonderful photographer named Steve Spring, who's a nature photographer and a master printer. And I had had the idea for a while, and he and I worked together to photograph areas of the structure of the banyan tree. And he photographed them, and then he printed them on silk and silk organza panels. And this was an exhibition I had at the Palm Beach Cultural Council. And the structure in the center is my interpretation of the banyan tree and its growth formations, with the panels that Steve photographed and printed on either side. There we are, collaborators. And this exhibition also consisted of 4 smaller works that were really a departure for me from work that you'll see in a minute that I had been doing. And they were more about my life cycles and nature as a life cycle. And I had what is referred to as a health challenge. And these were my way of working on the concept of life and a cycle and growth. And again, using that as a metaphor. So here are examples. I've never seen them this large, you know. It's like
How large are they?
well, they're actually 16 by 16 inches. They're not very large. They're small. And that's one of the things I like to discuss is the fact that, you know, I thought a lot about the way artists work. Artists work alone in the studio on what I call small pieces, alone by hand, and then you work on larger pieces with assistants when you need help, or you can design a piece and have it fabricated by somebody else, or you can collaborate. So there are so many different ways of working, and I'll show you what I mean by that. There's a 3/4 view of that. And then most recently, Carla Walter had seen my installation at the Palm Beach Cultural Council and had invited me to make a proposal to have a 2-person exhibit at the gallery at the Eissey Campus with Vicki Siegel. And again, I approached Steve Spring, and this time I had this idea that I'd been thinking about for quite a while, of using the metaphor of water to represent life, being that water is the essence of life, it's very essential to life, and all the aspects of water, especially where we live here in Florida, although it's all over, and surrounded by it. So Steve Spring does scuba diving, and I asked him to photograph the coral reefs, which are, as you all know, very endangered. And so these were some of the images he photographed. And the way we worked together is he photographed different aspects of it, and then we worked together and decided on what image to use. And the culmination of it was this particular installation at the Palm Beach State College, which consists of 6 panels. And we had taken one image and divided it in 3 parts. And he printed it on habitized silk and then on silk organza as an overlay. And then it's a reversal, it's a reflection. So the other 3 panels are reflected. And along with this, I collaborated with Sandra Kuba, who is a fiber artist and who is here in the audience, I believe, Sandy. And she basically experimented and tried the idea of using sea life forms. We worked on it together, but she basically created and constructed these jellyfish out of organza and resin and fibers. And this installation can be reconfigured in different spaces. And the idea behind it was to feel as if you're walking into the environment underwater, under the sea. And I think this is a wonderful shot because when Ellie had asked Vicki and myself to speak, it was about materials and metaphor. Well, again, using water as a metaphor for life, and then the materials I use being fibers. But this is a great shot because it also shows Vicki's work and the fact that the exhibition is called Blurring Distinctions, which I think is very appropriate. And alongside with this is one of my fiber constructions called 3 Arches Waterfall. This is using man-made fibers and constructing this structure, and it has LED lights strung in it to represent spilling water. So when it's dark, you would see the lights. And here's another shot of the installation. Go on to my interpretation of the mangroves. Florida mangroves, if any of you have ever gone kayaking and seen the mangroves. So this is, again, using the materials of natural and man-made and techniques such as macrame, which is very popular, you know, for hanging baskets and things of that sort, and wrappings, but interpreting them in my way and Here's a detail of it. And this piece is called Silver Rain. Again, it's a fiber form structure, and it has silver chains, which represent spilling water. And then I do a series that I have been working on over all these years on what I consider my drawings. And they're pieces that I work on that are based on woven backgrounds, and the threads are all wrapped, and then the wrapped elements I use to draw with. And this is my one example of it, using handmade paper and the fiber wrapped elements to create this netscape. It's called a netscape thing. You see a detail? Here's another one representing more like earth tones. This has burnt paper and copper wire. This is the most recent piece that was influenced by my stay in Venice last summer, and so I've included the Murano glass beads. And again, this to me is a drawing, and it represents my idea of water in that sense. And finally, this is a piece called Reclaimed Coral, which consists of a looped structure and many, many pieces, broken pieces and shards of coral pieces that I found while walking on the beach over quite a period of time. Near where I live, there's a beach with a coral reef not far out, and due to the destruction of the coral reef, all these little pieces, thousands of pieces of coral are washing up on the shore, which I've collected, as I'm sure many other people have, and I wanted to pay homage to the coral. And so this piece is encrusted with these pieces of coral. And that is it.
Thank you, Leora, for both working with me together. I want to thank again Carla Walters for having confidence in our work and helping us to facilitate having the show at the Eissey Gallery. And thank you again, Ellie, for having us talk here tonight, and all of you for coming. So appreciative of it. I'm a narrative artist. My work is informed by both personal and communal memories. What I think makes my work unique is that I unite painting, drawing, and photography, and I do a lot of experimentation. I'm constantly in my studio experimenting with different techniques. I hear about something, I talk about something, and then I go into my studio and I give it a whirl. And so you'll see a lot of different things within the actual material of the work and what I use. Even though you might perceive it as just paint, there's usually many layers of different things within it. I also teach art here at the Armory as well as at Old School Square, and I do workshops, which we'll talk about in a little bit because I have some workshops coming up. So I grew up in both New York and in Chicago. We moved around a lot as a child, and so this is Chicago. I always felt myself as an outsider. I went to a lot of different elementary, middle school, and high schools. I mean, we're constantly moving for one reason or another. And I found myself in the middle of my sophomore year of high school at a new school outside of Chicago, and I started taking classes. I'd take the train every Saturday into the city. So this is another thing Leora and I have in common, is the Art Institute of Chicago. I, as a teenager, used to go down there every Saturday, and I would take drawing classes, and I was painting. I was lucky enough that my high school there went from a high school in New York that you couldn't even get a pencil and a piece of paper to a high school that had a beautiful art department outside of Chicago. So I was painting. So I've been painting since I was probably like 15, 16 years old, as well as, for me, a big influence in my work was going down to the Art Institute of Chicago and looking at all of the paintings, because before I went to class, I would go in and look at the art. They had giant Rothkos and there was giant Jackson Pollocks, and I would just sit there. And what the art did for me was make me feel like there was something else in the universe, because as you'll see later on in my work, spiritual and religion is always something that's important to me in some sort of a way. So as a teenager, I was already looking at, the tea ceremony and Indian rituals and things like that, besides my own religion. I went to graduate school, as Ellie mentioned, in Italy, and I was doing photography there. This is me dancing in the piazza in Brindisi at 5 a.m. in the morning. And, I had this fantastic artist life there. This is a photograph that I took in 1979. So my interest was in, after, I had painted as a young, but then I really took a big interest in photography. And the photographers at the time that really, there are many photographers that interested me, but Diane Arbus, Mary Ellen Marks were just some, because I always liked the strange, the unusual, the weird. And this is South Beach, before it was South Beach, when it was really the area that, people's grandmothers, including my own, went to be in, to spend their winters. And those Art Deco hotels that are now, all fancy and fixed up were really not like that at all. But they still had their Art Deco structures. So this is from graduate school. Religion always interested me. Headdresses have always interested me. Odd altars, things that people create, or just something that's, this is you'll see this pops up in my work today. This is a photo also from 1979. Religion always interests me, and back then I started combining photos. So I would go in the darkroom. This is the time when we all did silver gelatin prints, and I'd go into the darkroom and I would be printing more than one photo on the same sheet of paper myself. have always been interested in combining unusual forms. So, to me, the three children that I saw there had some sort of, resemblance also to an altar, to whatever, and their resemblance also to this strange rock formation. So jumping ahead a few years, I've been using, in the more recent years, both painting, drawing, and photography. So I'm taking my photographs. I had been doing landscape paintings, some really large flower paintings, and I just looked at them and I said, well, I feel like my work from the 70s was a lot stronger than these landscapes that I'm doing. This was like probably around, 2000 or so. And I said, well, what is it that made me feel that way? And I felt it was my use of photography. So I started to find a way that I could combine photographic images within my painting. So in this case, the top part is two photographs that I've combined via a technique called image transfer. It's a very simple technique. And then there's many layers of paint and drawing within the painting, and that's also very typical of my work. Again, you can see painting along with photography and the use of image transfer. And what is a little bit different on this piece, which more recent work also, is that I've actually taken the photographic image and used it as an element and had it printed. So this is actually an archival pigment print with acrylic and image transfer. So you can already see that I've already was working on the idea of certain types of boundaries. I had been using a lot this barbed wire, which forms a significant boundary. So this is work, from a year and a half ago that I've been working on that. And then recently, the plight of the Syrians this summer, really, seeing those migrants constantly traveling from one country to another, trying to travel overland, just really made me think even more of the idea of boundaries. And certainly as an artist, there's many ways to depict this, and I'm sure there are many artists who are also working in this. So this piece is from our show, and that metaphor of a boundary where one thing becomes another. It could be geographical, where one country becomes another. There's many different forms. This is called Out of Bounds, and again, it's acrylic and image transfer, and it's 7 feet by 9 feet. So this is a large piece for me. I paint fairly large on a regular basis, but this was a really large piece. This piece is called, well, Uncharted. You can see it. You don't need me to tell you. But this particular piece really is dealing with geographic boundary. There's image transfers that are actually from maps that are holding her within. But then each painting in the show interprets a different type of a boundary. So we might have geographical boundaries or psychological boundaries. And each one of the paintings has its own kind of unique technique to it. So there's a lot of experimental work going on within these paintings. So this is psychological boundaries. And you can see each one of these figures is also pushing against the actual boundary of the canvas itself. So this is a physical boundary, psychological, physical, our struggle with nature, which I think is, very important. Somebody at the opening came up and said the middle image reminded them of Surfer Girl. And I said, no, actually, it's about high water rising. The environment is a very important issue for all of us, and a lot of, just as Leora worked a lot specifically with the metaphor of, in her work, of the environment. Many, not all of my paintings, but many of them have the environment as an aspect of it. And this is, the boundary of yourself, your physical self. So you can see that more and more I am incorporating those photographs. I work with the models, which you'll see coming up, some more things about working with the model. So I have a few different people that model pretty regularly for me. And you can see, again, we're pushing against the boundaries. So human and natural forms become transformed by the use of acrylic paint, image transfers, and my photographs, and the use of paint skins. Here, the boundary becomes a metaphor for the point where the two things become different. So in this painting, which has a big poured paint background, it's got a full underpainting on it. Besides being poured, it has a full underpainting, and then where she is leaves and he becomes bark, and those are done image transfer, this technique that I often use. More recently, I've been exploring the use of painting and photography combined and the blending of these two art forms. So this process for me results in images that are both real and imaginary. The combination of the photograph and the painting, for me, generates a more dense reality because both the media reinforces as well as challenge each other. So as opposed to the previous image where you can see that I've applied the photographic elements on the surface of the paint, this is actually a photograph, or actually two photographs that I've taken, that I've worked in Photoshop, that I've put together, and then had archival pigment print made of them, fairly large. And then I'm painting under, over, around. It's just, there's a lot of different types of painting going on within it. But you can still see the photographs, and you also see this idea of boundary, where the two pieces are becoming, two figures are becoming either separate, but actually where they're becoming part of each other. He becomes part of the fire, and she becomes part of the water.
But Vicki, you're using quite large images. So are you printing them that large to work with?
Well, the actual, in this case, the base photo was all water and all fire that I printed on archival on canvas and then painted on top of. So in this case, which is again another rising water, about our high water rising, you won't see me living on the ocean here in Florida, as much as I find it beautiful and enticing and whatever. I think that our environment is like many other people. I think our environment is our biggest crisis. So you have these two figures that are just kind of holding on to each other, barely keeping their heads above water. So as I was saying before, I often combine two images. I'll work with a model, or I'll take photographs. I go out and shoot quite often. And then I'll transform those, as I've already showed you wired before, in those two separate images became part of this. And again, she's, like a Madonna image. So for me, what this says is that we're raised to be one way, we're raised to be in a certain mindset as a woman, but yet I find all women to be quite strong. There's another one of my models. As you can see, this is how I photograph them. And then they get transformed within the painting, again, using photographic imagery and paint. The model and the photographic image, so you can see how the painting and the model relate to each other. Many people are interested in the process. So here you can see I have many layers of paint in my work. I start with like a base layer, then I add another layer of color, then I add another layer of paint, I add texture, I add the image transfer on top. I use my camera as my sketchbook. So this is a photograph that I would consider, the same as doing a drawing. It's just a different type of a sketch. I do drawings before I create my work. So you can see on the left-hand side, how many different drawings I might have done. And you can see actually for some of the images that I've just shown you, you can see their little pre-sketches, and those are like thumbnail sizes. And here's the actual work in progress that I had shown earlier up on the wall in the studio. This is No Play Zone, which is a little bit different than the other barbed wire piece in that this is the barbed wire in this one is all hand drawn, whereas the other one was photographic. And this is a funny, I've actually not even shown this anywhere other than to you, but it's a funny piece. It's to me very humorous, and it's just completely abstract. And I like the idea of doing it photographically, but you can see I've also incorporated elements of photograph. It just becomes a no play zone. It's actually my play zone. So as far as constantly experimenting, this uses a lot of different type of mixed media techniques. There's painting on glass that I take off the glass. There's a lot of different pastes and colors. Again, photographic images. A couple of shots. I have my studios in my home. I have 2 studios, one on either side of the house. I kind of outgrew my original studio, and now that I don't have any children at home, I've taken over most of the house, and you can say, woohoo, yeah. I feel kind of, happy and free about that. And then, the main reason I would like to move out of that and maybe get like a warehouse space as far as studio space goes. But as you can see, I have my buddy there, and I don't want to leave her on, she likes to be there in the studio with me. She usually parks herself right under my easel. Process-wise, people are always, so often I work and I create what's called a paint skin. I paint off of the canvas, and then I peel it up and I apply it to the canvas. So these are, I might have like a stack a foot high, and you can see them in the far corner of, both photographic images that I've created, as well as color pieces, big color pieces. Then I use them as various elements. That's the way that I get this particular texture, and I combine these images with the photographs. For this show, I was really trying to push myself outside, the boundaries of whatever. And in a minute, you'll see some other of the pieces coming up. But this is the floor. I really took over everywhere because some of these are large. So I created some sculptural pieces. You can see the acrylic skin pours. This is poured paint on the left side. And that is part of the layers of a piece that later became applied to a backing of Mylar that is a huge acrylic skin. It's as tall as almost life size, just under life size. So that became man-formed, which is acrylic on Mylar, but it was not painted on the Mylar, nor was it painted on canvas. It was painted as an acrylic skin. And then in my experimentation mode, for a number of years, I've been experimenting with light and the paint going through the light, as well as the paint on tubes. And this is one of the experiments that I've done. This is called All Together Now. So this is recycled tubes, acrylic paint skins, and light. And all of these are metaphors for our environment. More experimentation. I'm a Golden Artist Educator. So I do workshops, and I'm always trying to learn new things and teach new things. So something like this, which is a dripped paint background, might become a painting like this, where I've incorporated, again, painting, photography, drawing. This is gioia, which is joy in Italian, one of my joyful moments in life, and I've turned it into a painting. And you can see little areas of this figure where there's photography. Part of it is a little bit around his eye, and then part of his pants is photography, and the rest of it is painted. So there's this combination that creates this kind of strange reality, and that's what I achieved to do. But I also, try to bring forth in every painting some sort of an idea and some sort of a concept behind it, as well as the beauty of the paint. And that wraps it up for me in perfect things.